Well, hi, everybody, Wes McDonald here, and I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of TigerTube. And if you can't see me or my guest, that means you're listening to us on Tigerpaw Radio, so thank you very much. Really excited today to have a couple of awesome guests from the Cannata Group and the Cannata Report. You probably know them already, and as is my habit, I like to let my guests introduce themselves. So, CJ, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm CJ Cannata, President and CEO of the Cannata Report, and thrilled to be here. It's great to be here with you, Wes, today.
Well, that's awesome. I can't thank you enough for your time. And Scott, maybe you can introduce yourself for our audience.
Absolutely. I'm Scott Cullen. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Cannata Report, and I'm happy to be here as well.
Well, awesome. And hey, I'm going to jump right into it, right? So,
Please.
the Cannata Report in your group has been around for as many years as I've been in the office equipment industry, and I know for a lot longer than that. So maybe just give us a little history of the Cannata Report and its work in the channel over the years, right? So I'm sure most or some people know about this, but just share some of the highlights with us.
Sure. Interestingly enough, and I'll spend less time on its inception and more time, I think, on what's occurred over the past 10 years. How did the Cannata Report start? Well, Frank always wanted to write. That really was his burning passion. He's a reader and a writer. He had an opportunity in, I think, 1981 or 1981, when he went out on his own as a consultant. His first assignment was with Konica and Minolta, then, of course, separate companies. He did a consulting assignment for them, did an incredible amount of research, gave the Japanese what he felt they were looking for, and then said to them, and they were happy with the assignment. I think he waited to make sure they were happy with the assignment, and then said, "Hey, look, I've done all this other research. Would you mind, as long as I don't share anything that was proprietarily done for you, can I use this for my own purposes? I'd love to start, a newsletter. I'd love to start seeing what I can do with this information." And the Japanese, interestingly enough, and I think this is culturally very interesting, said, "Yeah, no problem." I was thinking an American company would probably be thinking, "That's a great idea, but how can I kind of cash in on that? Can I license part of that? Or yeah, you can do that, but I want a piece of the back end." But the Japanese, I always thought that was interesting. They got what they were looking for, and then wished Frank well on his merry way, and thankful to this day. Konica Minolta are merged now, as we all know. We're still doing business with them, and really enjoy doing business with them. So that's how we started.
Now let's fast forward a little bit, because my experience with the Cannata Group since day one has been with you. So when you sort of came into the organization, what kind of things were you looking at? Either to keep the same or to change, or what kind of innovations have you seen?
Absolutely. There are two things initially. First, digitization. We had no digital presence. We had a website, but I think there was like a holding page that wasn't even designed. It was just like I don't know what, but something very unprofessional. We had no digital content presence. And the other thing was, as a marketer, which is many people in the industry knows is my background, I got right away, forget what I thought I knew before I worked for Frank. From the first meeting I went to with Frank, I saw what a big deal he was. And I'm thinking, what he puts out in terms of how it looks is not tantamount to his brand, not just who he is and his experience and our experience as a company and all of that, but how he dresses, how he speaks, how good he is off the cuff, how professional, how polished. That's the word. So I wanted to make everything that we did, I would say, Frank, everything that you have to do has to look like that, including the Cannata Report event, which is why we stopped doing roasts, by the way. So there was a big rebranding effort. And the first thing that we did, in addition to complement the digitalization, or maybe this came first, was to take the Cannata Report and evolve it from a newsletter to more like a coffee table. There's a perfect bound glossy magazine. And that's what we wanted to create at that time. Elevate the brand with the goal of diversifying our client base. We had 6 big clients at the time. Now we have, 25 or 30 at any given time of all different sizes, which we felt was important to sustain our business as things continue to evolve and change. And of course, good for every business, big clients, small clients, things that are more expensive to do for clients, less expensive to do, so that you've got as much balance as possible.
Well, that's great. And I love this spirit of innovation that you definitely embrace. And I do love the format of the magazine. that it really does have that polish that you're talking about. And just as importantly, the polish to the information in the articles that are inside. And that kind of gives me a little segue over to you, Scott. So maybe give me a little background on when you joined the organization, what kinds of things you've been doing, with the writing schedule, et cetera.
Okay, sure. I think I've been with the company now for 5.5 years. The time has really flown, and I have been in the industry since '86, starting with a end user office trade publication, and which morphed into a second publication, Office Dealer Magazine. So I've been writing for dealers actually since '88. There are very few publications from '86, '88, '90 that are still around. And when I had the opportunity to join CJ and Frank, I just jumped at it because I was going to the premier publication in the industry. So what I brought to the Cannata Report is sort of a journalistic perspective. I like to think of myself as one of the longest lasting true journalists still in this industry. There's plenty of good ones. CJ and Frank have really given me an opportunity to help guide the editorial, come up with the themes, the concepts, add to what was there already. I now have taken over like 90% of the annual survey from Frank. I do rely on him a lot for his insights, and he also does some of the tabulations on the results. But it's really a fun opportunity to help CJ navigate the new look, feel, and direction of the Cannata Report these past 5.5 years.
One of the things I can say, you sort of touched on this idea of a journalistic approach. And I've obviously done, some interviews with you over the years, and I've always really appreciated that because the questions are honest, they're earnest, and the production of the materials doesn't hold back. So it's never negative, but it's always honest. And I really love what you guys are doing there. Hey, so let's move to where we are, these current realities. And before we actually started recording, we were having a little chit chat, kind of talking a little bit about these, current realities, right? So what I'd like to do, and maybe CJ, I'll start with you, is get your take on where we are in the process of getting back to normal.
I don't believe in going backwards, period. There in anything, you cannot go backward. There's no going back to a better time. There's no going, you can only move forwards in life, in business, and relationships. So there will be something new. I guess you could call it a new normal, but it won't be the same as before. What will it be? I think that's hard to say because there are so many. It's not just the pandemic that we're dealing with. In a lot of cases, the pandemic is not the biggest problem. It's the economic and sociological and political instabilities, if you will. But I actually go so far as to say that to some degrees, and in a lot of cases that are really the larger problem here. Getting back to a new normal, what I ultimately think is going to, and you're seeing it happening right now, supply chain and chip issues, I think pragmatically are among the biggest problem in terms of getting back to whatever a new normal might look like. But aside from that, I think you're seeing big businesses and enterprise accounts, which is kind of interesting because they're typically aligned with more conservative section of society. Beginning with enterprise businesses, you could look at what Delta's doing, what companies in Silicon Valley are doing, different kinds of companies, Coca-Cola, and what some of these companies have started doing early on, in part because they're global companies that have global brands and need to be concerned about how they're perceived, how they do business all over the country, but also they pragmatically want to get back to work. And they're going to, this may sound like a strange statement, take the path of least resistance. Every path has resistance. Some of the policies implemented by some of these enterprise companies are being hit with lawsuits and this or that, but I'm sure those companies, and I've read things to this degree, are thinking about, well, yeah, but it would be worse if, my companies, if my employees were getting sick and I had those types of issues to contend with. So I think regardless of my opinion, you're seeing that. You're seeing enterprise businesses put whatever they are, they're different, but they are putting restrictions into place. Even from dealers who, yeah, we're, in our local area, it's not really a problem, but I can't get into this enterprise account. And it's not a big problem right now because we don't do that much enterprise business, but, within the next month, we're gonna have to do something, meaning we're gonna have to do something else, and maybe something that I may not personally agree with or want to do, but we got to get back to work, and we need to be able to get in to see these accounts.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there about this pragmatism, right? And kind of the image that I have in my mind, it's an old image that's been used for many years, right? And if I look at, kind of a rock in a river, right? And that rock is how we feel about something. So either side, choose a side. But pragmatism is that water that actually finds its way around the rock and says, no, this is the path of least resistance, right? So I think you're right. I think it is, again, there's no easy answer to any of this, but that pragmatic approach, I hadn't really thought that much about it, kind of tying it into a lot of the other socioeconomic realities that surround us, but how can we be free of those, right? So Scott, what's your take on that, sort of on what you see for current realities? Doesn't have to be tied to pragmatism. Is there anything else, that you'd like to add?
Well, let me talk about remote hybrid work. I've been working remotely for, I think, 23 years now. Okay, you as well. And for some of us, it's nothing new. And I remember people telling me, how do you do it? I wouldn't have the discipline. And I work in a deadline-oriented business. So if you want to get paid, you've got to meet your deadlines. And I think that can apply to virtually any remote work situation. And I firmly believe people are going to figure it out. And in a few years, no one's going to be discussing the impact of remote or hybrid work because it's going to be a common scenario. Now, my partner, Mary, she's an engineer, buildings, HVAC, et cetera. And her company has a number of offices. They're based here in New Jersey, but they also have offices in Philadelphia and New York. They just closed their New York office. They feel they don't need it anymore. Employees had the option of working from home a couple of days a week. And this was after the pandemic when they were working from home 24/7, which, let me be honest here, it certainly cramped my style when you're used to being home alone all day. And then all of a sudden somebody else is working in the other room. What her company is seeing is a lot of contraction with clients in larger offices and big buildings. And so they're doing a lot of office redesigns. Companies don't need as much space now. And her business is picking up. They're busier than ever, partially because of that, and partially because projects that were put on hold are picking up. So what does that tell you about the future of remote or hybrid work?
Yeah. It's interesting. And a lot of the dealers I've spoken with as well, when they were forced kind of into sending people home and looking at these locations, like, yeah, closing down some of these locations has been some of the best things we could have done, right? Like it's almost like an albatross. You're so used to paying the money and having those locations and in using those workflows. Calgary in my country, which is a big oil business, right? The oil boom,
Sure.
Built a lot of buildings in downtown Calgary, and with all the remote work there and the double whammy of the hit kind of on the tar sands in the oil industry, a lot of those buildings were empty, and people are turning them into interior farms. So they're basically, grow ops for, tomatoes and lettuce and kale and, all these kinds of things. Right. So it is funny. That's something that has never happened before, but this innovation that's happening that always surprises me, this new normal, it's really fascinating to watch. Right. And yeah, Scott, I'm with you. I'm much more productive in a remote environment, and no, not everybody is, right? It's not a blanket statement, but certainly for me, because I've worked in a remote space, I think for about 20 years now, that certainly it is nothing new for us. And I do enjoy sometimes when you get people asking, for advice, like just little things, right, that you take for granted as you're moving through your day. How do you do this? How do you manage that, et cetera, right? So appreciate that.
Can I, Wes?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I just want to add one thing. I think the real question here is not necessarily how many employees will be coming back to work, but how often. And I think that's the question. And that's really difficult to answer because aside what I've said about enterprise accounts across the country and the globe being more arduous, if that's the right word, in terms of putting restrictions into place surrounding COVID, whatever they might be. I think geography, just like geography is going to play a big role in, I think, what that ratio looks like, as well as type of business and the culture of the company.
I think so.
To Scott's point at the very
Culture.
beginning, getting to dealers, we had some dealers right away out of the gate say, "What do I need all this space for? There's 4 people in the office, and everyone's doing fine. We're doing great." And that was, within a month. Well, a year and a half later, that same dealer and others had different opinions. Like, people weren't being as efficient working from home. They were, so to your point, it's a skill like everything else. I think interview processes will change. I think what's required to be an employee of different kinds of companies, particularly with hybridization, is going to be a type of personality that can respond to that.
We have a different dynamic now, younger people come into the office, right? So, how about that? If we have a younger workforce coming to the office place, what does the future of volumes look like for print?
Well, I'll start with that. And I'm not a young person by any stretch. I wish I were. I feel young, but I rarely print. I had a printer. We actually have one in the other room. I can probably count on one hand the number of times in a year that I've pressed print. Okay. I look at my youngest daughter. She's 24, never prints. She doesn't even have a printer. So I know one young person doesn't represent a generation, but you show me a young person who prints a lot, and I'll show you someone who's totally out of step with the times.
And, I was speaking with a dealer when I was at the show last week, and he said one of the fascinating things was that his kids go to a school, and it's like it also has a section where, less fortunate kids exist. So there used to be this digital divide, right? Where, richer kids would have access to this digital technology, and then, poorer kids wouldn't, right? And I'm not saying it doesn't still exist, but he was saying in that school environment that the school is now providing Chromebooks or similar things to every child, right? Like all the kids, because, they're selling them at like $125, like for a wholesale cost to a school, right? It's unbelievable, and that's the digital technology. Like you said, that sharing platform, once it becomes that ubiquitous, once people are really learning that way, that's what they're going to take into the office in the future as well, right?
Another real world example, using my partner, Mary, again, and her engineering firm, and everybody working from home. At one time when they were in the office, they used to be printing out tons and tons of blueprints. They're doing all that on screen. I mean, they used to have they still have a wide format printer that would handle all that output. It hardly ever gets used anymore. So I don't want to discourage dealers who are thinking, from thinking that not thinking that wide format is a good diversification opportunity, because it is in certain markets. But in that engineering field, the current crop of people working there, and I'm sure the future generations, are not going to be printing as much, if any, of those blueprints when they can do it and make changes and all of the things they used to do on paper, now that they can do it on screen.
I've often thought about that, actually, when we talk about kind of wide format, and even with, kind of the quote unquote, the A4 revolution, which has, by the way, been around for a long time, is that how could they not be free from some kind of digital disruption as well, right? It's and I think as our dealer community and how we support it, that we've got to help them kind of embrace that, like you said, find out where those niches are, but to go in eyes wide open and say, here's some of the challenges that you're going to face when they start doing these kind of workflows, right? Absolutely. And the good news is, I think there's money to be made in those programs that help them to actually digitize those floor plans and stuff, right? And other things. And that's probably something we'll jump into a bit there. And I just actually did an interview with Jeff Bendix for a presentation I had to give. And he says that he's leading with security every single time now, right? That it has become kind of the cornerstone of what he does, and print follows that. So he just kind of folds it in, right? Starts with security and then wraps everything else into that. So I love it. So cybersecurity. And Scott, what about you?
So we just published our 36th annual dealer survey, and on the managed IT front, 46% of the dealers surveyed offered managed IT. Not necessarily surprising number there, and most of those were dealers with revenues over 10 million. Okay, and when we look at growth opportunities for dealers, cybersecurity is one of the top hottest growth opportunities showing up in our survey. So we've got data. One of the companies that we're going to be watching next year is Visual Edge IT. They're making a strong move in that direction. So I think it's going to be something we're going to be talking about, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for the foreseeable future. It is a strong diversification opportunity for dealers who have the resources to go in that direction, but there's also plenty of help out there. And one other organization that I think is going to be introducing a managed IT component next year is Keypoint Intelligence. I've been talking to them a lot lately, and
an e-commerce platform.
And an e-commerce platform. And that's something else that we might talk about as a trend going forward, because how did you buy the last thing you purchased, Wes? How did you do it?
Well, I'm a big fan of buying things online because we've had to. And I actually set up my wife's physical store with an online retail presence, so that she's now an online, seller as well, right? It was out of necessity in the beginning, but how she could live without it before, right? You have, in her case, moms that are stuck at home and they want something, they can't get out because the kids or, some of their obligation. And so she has a delivery service now for online, platform, right? So it is pervasive, like in every single aspect of our society, right?
I just say, look out. Obviously, it is not a topic that can be ignored, e-commerce. And you will see more from us on that topic. We're, as Scott pointed out, we're having a lot of conversations with a lot of people, both companies like Keypoint that are offering services to actually, to different dealers and others in the segment. But you'll definitely be seeing, you'll be seeing more on that. Again, it's not something that can be ignored. What's the right balance? What are all the challenges? How do we see that unfolding, and what might be the best way for it to unfold for our space?
So we're at the point in the interview now where if you just had one piece of advice for dealers out there that are navigating into 2022, what would that be?
You need to decide as a dealer, and any company needs to do this now and when they're starting or rebranding or what have you. What kind of company you want to be? Going back to basics. What do you want to, for example, do you want to be a company that services the office? Do you want to be a company that specializes in printing? Do you want, who do you want to, what type of clients do you want to be servicing? And therefore, then you have to back in what is the reality of their needs today? That is that's what one thought leader said his approach was. Very successful, entrepreneurial minded guy. So I would leave dealers with that. Got to kind of go back to, what kind of company do I want to be? What kind of clients do I want? And what do they need? And how do I adjust myself, if to a greater or lesser degree, to be successful or dominant?
I love that answer, because it's not a question of everyone's doing this, maybe I should too, because once you have that lens of what kind of company do I want to be and who do I want to serve, then those answers start to come naturally, right? And Scott, what about you? Do you have one?
I certainly do. So my advice to dealers, and for any dealer who's been around for a long time and watching us, I don't think this is going to surprise them, because it's probably something they've done, and it's, don't be afraid to change. It's hard, it's scary, it's necessary. I mean, I look at someone, looking at the Cannata Report, Frank, at his advanced age, he's older than CJ by quite a few years.
You can say it because he doesn't stop talking about it. So I now prefer to underscore his age and that he's still working, how vibrant he is, because as a marketer, you can't not talk about it, then you might as well talk about it as loudly as you can. And
okay, so Frank's in his 80s. He wasn't afraid to bring in CJ, afraid to bring in me, afraid to have us changed the dynamic and the look and feel of the Cannata Report. So we are more relevant today than we've ever been. And if someone like Frank, who's been around forever and will be around forever, can do it, I think any dealer, you know, has any interest in continuing their dealership going into the future, they'll do it. They'll do it as well. But I think most of these dealers who may be watching us, and they've been around, as I said earlier, have been around for a while. They've been doing it all along.
So listen, I cannot thank you guys enough for doing this interview with me today. It is fun for me to finally be on the other end of the camera in the interview, to be able to bring some of your insights and visions to my viewing and listening public. So I cannot thank you guys enough. And I look forward to seeing you guys at an event soon. For everyone that's tuned in today, I want to thank you very much for watching another episode of TigerTube or listening to TigerTube Radio. And until next time, keep learning.